three important things, essentially. One of them is output. We want to know about output because output tells us something about the well-being of people in our economy. It's a kind of a proxy measure for output. Now, in terms of output, we are producing using labor. And obviously, if you're producing, then you get some kind of an income. That's also important to you. So we're also, not only are we interested in output, but we're also interested in unemployment. In other words, how is that output being distributed? Okay? We want people to be employed. Again, there's a well-being issue there. The other thing that we said we're interested in is prices and inflation. We said inflation is also an indicator of our general well-being of our economy and of the people within the economy. And inflation is important because it tells us something about any potential imbalances between what's being produced and what's being demanded. In other words, the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied, right? Inflation is telling us about any kind of imbalance. Now, if we're thinking about our market structure, as you would do, say, from microeconomics, we have output on the bottom, on our y-axis, on our x-axis we have output, y, and on our y-axis we have prices, p. Okay? What we've done in these chapters so far really is focus on the demand side of y. Okay? So we're producing and demanding, expenditure approach, some output. Okay? And we've spoken about essentially the demand side of that output. Okay? What we're now going to do is we're going to flip to the other axis, prices. And we're going to start talking a little bit more about prices. And what the theory is going to tell us is that price and price level and change in prices has a lot to do with the amount of money in an economy. In other words, whenever we transact, whenever we purchase, whenever we exchange, when goods move from the supply side of the economy, from the production side to the demand side, in other words, to households, the way that happens is through a monetary medium. In other words, money facilitates that exchange. And the same goes for the opposite side of that circular flow. When goods move, or when inputs move from the household side of the economy to the production side of the economy, right? So labor gets sold to firms. The way that transaction happens is through a monetary medium, in other words, through money. In other words, our economy is not a barter economy. The households do not barter labor for goods. Okay? You don't give your labor to a company in exchange for goods. What you do is you give your labor to a company in exchange for money. You then take that money and exchange that money for goods. Okay? So we have this thing called the medium of exchange. Money is the medium of exchange. So even though I am trading my labor ultimately for goods and services, I don't directly trade my labor for goods and services. I trade my goods and services for money. I then take that money and trade it for goods and services. So money sits in between the exchange of labor for goods and services. In other words, in terms of our circular flow diagram, labor flows from households to output, and goods flow from households to production. Production, output flows from producers to households. That's the circular flow. In the meantime, whilst labor is flowing in this direction, money is flowing in the opposite direction. And while goods are flowing in this direction, money is flowing in the opposite direction. So while we have a circular flow of goods going in one direction, we've got a circular flow of money going in the opposite direction, right? That's our medium of exchange. It's the thing by which we exchange, okay? We don't have a barter economy. And money, because that's the thing that we use to exchange stuff, the things that we actually exchange, when they are denominated in a price, are denominated in a money price. Okay? So when you want to purchase something, it's not, the price is not given in terms of some other goods and services that you could be exchanging, or in terms of labor, for example. I don't go to the shops and say, right, I'd like to buy a liter of milk, and Checkers, whatever, says to me, cool, that will cost you 1 unit of labor, right? The price of milk is not denominated in units of labor. Similarly, I don't, when I purchase a liter of milk, get a price that says, right, 1 liter of milk is 3/4 of a unit of bread, right? All of these things are denominated in a common unit, which is the monetary unit, because the money is the thing that intermediates the exchange. So prices are denominated in money. So when prices change, what that's telling us is that the monetary value of things are changing, which means we need to understand something about money to understand something about prices. When we want to understand prices, we need to understand money. Having said that, my PhD is on money, and I can tell you that there are probably very, very few people in the world who really, really have taken any time to actually understand how money works properly. And there's certainly a lot of disagreement about what it does and how it does it. So while we're going to go through a chapter that says this is how money works, that's certainly, there's a lot of holes in the story, put it that way, right? So we'll talk about how money works as a kind of a narrative example, but I would treat it kind of like, I don't know, like, let's say like the biblical account of how the world started in Genesis, right? I'd suggest that whilst that might be a story of how the world started, there's certainly a lot of disagreement to whether that's really true, right? And there are certainly a lot of, let's say, a lot of people who would say Genesis is definitely not true, right? Nevertheless, whatever, it serves its purpose. It tells you a story of how the world works. We're going to tell a story about how money works. And, okay, it's a little bit better than Genesis in that I would suggest it gives us a much better account of how money actually works, but I don't think that it's all true. In other words, there's a lot of things that are just not quite right. It's one account of how money works. It leaves a lot of stuff out, and the stuff that it leaves out is what matters if you really want to understand money. But this is a first year course, so we don't really want to understand money. We just want to understand how money influences prices. And for that purpose, our chapter is good enough. The way that it describes prices working, money is great. I mean, the description of how money works is fine for that. So, moving then into what money, this chapter about money, what are we going to do? And I've split, if you're following along in the slides, I've just split this first slide into 2 slides because there's a lot of stuff there, and I don't like slides with too much stuff on them. So what are we going to be doing? We're going to define what we mean by money, define it, and we'll see that in fact the way that we define it is in terms of its functions. So the definition and the functions are in fact one and the same. We define money by its functions. You'll see what that means in a moment. Okay, we explain the economic function of banks as well. So when we talk about money, we're going to be talking a lot about banks as well as any other kinds of depository institutions, but our focus really is primarily on banks. Banks and depository institutions are under the control of the Reserve Bank, so we're going to describe the structure and functions as well of the South African Reserve Bank, or the SARB. Okay? Finally, we're going to talk, well, not finally, but having laid the foundations, given some terminology, gotten that out of the way, we're then going to talk about how banks, the SARB, depository institutions, all these things come together. So the banking system, then the terminology that textbook uses, creates money. I don't like to refer to banks as creating money. I think it's a confusing terminology. Nevertheless, we will use that terminology, and I will illustrate why I feel like it's not the best terminology, but it has a meaning. Banks create money. It has a meaning, and we will use that meaning as we go through the chapter. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, so we've brought money into the system. We've spoken about banks and things. We're going to talk about how they are related to money, banks and the Reserve Bank, how they're related to money. Then we're going to talk about the demand side of money and the supply side of money. Demand and supply come together in the money market, and they are equilibrated by the price level, and the price level for money is the interest rate. So we'll talk about that. If we're dealing with price of money, we're also obviously dealing with quantity of money. Okay? And we're going to look at how the quantity of money then affects the general price level, in other words, the inflation rate. Okay, so demand, supply, we're dealing with equilibrium. We're going to introduce something called the monetary base, and we'll show how the monetary base determines something called the monetary multiplier, and we'll see how the money multiplier influences money supply. Okay, so we had an aggregate expenditure multiplier previously. We've now got something called a money multiplier. All of this we're going to show graphically. Okay, so we're going to show a market for money. And then we're also going to introduce something called the quantity theory of money. The quantity theory of money is essentially the relationship, it's a theory about the relationship between quantity of money and price levels. Okay? We will also distinguish the difference between a long run and the short run. We haven't introduced the term short run here, but long run versus short run. So that is the rather extensive set of goals for this chapter. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to do here. And it begins by a discussion on what money is. So it begins, this slide rather strangely splits the functions of money into 3 functions of money listed here and 1 function of money listed there. I don't know why, but that's what it does. I guess these are the 3 functions of money that are usually listed as the functions of money. A 4th function of money is this idea here. It's a means of settling debts. In other words, what we say here is that it's a unit of, and the terminology is deferred payment. Unit of deferred payment. I've done that wrong. Deferred payment. Okay? So, in other words, you can use money to settle your debts, which means you can use money to basically pay for things over time, which is interesting. I think that's one of the most interesting functions of money, is that you can exchange stuff over time. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't operate in a barter economy, okay? So, in other words, I don't go to Checkers, work at Checkers for a couple of hours, and then take a whole bunch of groceries home, right? In which case, I would be bartering directly my labor for the goods that I'm purchasing from Checkers, okay? Instead, what I do is I work here at Wits. At the end of the month, I get paid, and at some point, I decide I want to go to Checkers and buy some food, right? That means that I've provided my services at one point in time, and I then go and get, so I provided my labor, at one point in time, I then go and get goods and services in exchange at a totally different period of time, right? There's a separation of time between when I supply my labor and when I actually get the goods and services in return for that labor, okay? That's a separation in time. So if you really want to understand money, in my opinion, what you've got to understand money as is a thing that allows stuff to be separated by time, that exchange to be separated by time. And if it's separated by time, it is implicitly a debt/credit instrument, right? In other words, when I work for my labor, I then take money, I then take that money and exchange it for goods and services. right? In the meantime, I have basically exchanged my debt, my labor, for something that's kind of like a debt instrument, right? I get something which says, right, you can use this in the future to go and buy something. Okay? So it's not very different to perhaps entering into an agreement that you could enter into of the following sort, right? You're with your mates, you go out, you have a drink, you say to your buddy, I don't have any cash on me today, can you buy me a drink? I'll buy you a drink in the future, right? So that night, it's your mate's turn to buy the drinks. 3 weeks later, you're the one that buys the drinks, right? In the meantime, you are indebted to your friend, right? You have received goods and services, drinks today, in exchange for drinks and services in the future. You will give drinks and services in the future, right? In that interim period, you are essentially in your friend's debt. That is sort of one step away from your friend asking today, may I borrow some money from you? I will pay it back to you next week. No problem, you give them the cash. Next week they give you the cash back. In the meantime, that person is in your debt, right? When the monetary system operates, it's similar. The university, I supply labor to the university. The university gives me money. Until I've spent that money, essentially, the university has given me nothing, no goods and services in exchange for my labor. They've given me some money. Once I spend that money, I then get goods and services, right? If I spend that money at Checkers, okay, and that money finds its way up to Whitey Basson, and Whitey Basson uses that money to send his daughter to Wits, right? Essentially, the entire circle is complete, right? The university trades goods and services with me. I trade goods and services with Checkers. Checkers trades goods and services with the university, right? In between, we hold money. And whilst we hold money, we're essentially holding something that is like a debt instrument, right? While you hold that thing, you can take it and exchange it for goods and services. In the same way that if I go out tonight and my friend buys the drinks, right? I owe him at some point. We've entered into an arrangement whereby at some point I must give him goods and services in return, right? Same way, if I hold money, at some point someone must give me goods and services in return. That's how money works. That's why I hold it. Because someone will give me goods and services in return. So while I'm holding that money, it's as if I'm holding debt. In other words, someone owes me something. The question, of course, is who owes me if I'm holding money? And with the monetary system, anyone can owe me. So who is on the other side of that debt? This is where a lot of the kind of discussion about how money works gets a little bit tricky. But the idea is everyone in society. In other words, in the same way that money is issued by the state and is something that is owned essentially by the state, we as members of the state own the money in the same way that we own government and we own anything that government owns, right? We are all part owners of the state as citizens of the state. So as a monetary system, we are all part owners of the monetary system. To the extent that we hold money, the system owes us something. To the extent that we don't hold money and we in fact are in some kind of negative money situation because we've borrowed, say, through the banking system, we basically owe society in general. That's, to me, the best way of trying to understand what money is and how it works. Okay? It then becomes a lot more useful then to understand things like today we use money in the shape of coins or printed pieces of paper, right? Other societies have not always used those things. They use things like shells. If you're wondering how could a shell possibly have value when you can just pick a shell up off the floor, why would anyone then accept a shell in an exchange, right? Why would someone give up value for something like a shell. Right? Well, it's the same reason that you give up value when you have money, because when you're holding it, there's an indication somewhere of a debt. Someone owes you something. So when societies use, for example, a shell as money, it's not that you are getting a shell. No one cares that it's a shell. But there's something symbolic about that shell which says that you are owed, right? In other words, it's a wealth to you. You can use that shell in exchange for something else, right? The question then of how that shell derives value becomes very complex, but is made less complex when you understand something like something called the yap. So there were islanders, and I can't remember exactly where, but let's call it in Indonesia somewhere. I don't know if that's true. But they use something called the yap. So the yap is a small circular stone with a hole in the middle, so you can thread it and carry it around, right? And that's what a yap is, and you can use yaps in exchange for stuff. So when you owe someone something, basically, you give them a yap and you get whatever it is that you want from them, right? Now, by giving them that yap, you say, I owe you something in the future, right? But of course, that yap can circulate, so someone else can give me back that yap, and then that cancels out my debt. In other words, if I was owing something to you and I gave you a yap, you gave that yap to that lady over there, and that lady over there then gave me that yap and I gave her something in return, my debt to you is now cancelled, right? In other words, I gave you a yap and I got something from you. You took that yap, you gave it to her, and she gave you something in return. Eventually, you give me the yap back and I give you something in return. I have my yap back. I no longer owe you anything. You don't have that yap. I have it. I don't owe you. Because you were paid something else, right? However, in that system, there were some yaps that were so big that, I mean, basically as high as you can imagine standing, right? So you can carve a big stone as big as you can, right? With a big hole in the middle. Now this yap never moves. And you can put it outside your house, right? And when I owe you something, I use my yap to owe you. But I never give it to you. You never own it, right? In other words, it sits outside my house. You cannot move it. It's too big, okay? But you have a claim on my yap, right? And basically, the bigger my yap, the wealthier I am. And there was a story about a particularly wealthy family who had a huge yap that was on a boat that sank into the bottom of the ocean. That yap now sits at the bottom of the ocean. No one questioned whether it was there. Everyone was certain that that was where it was. The fact that it sank to the bottom of the ocean did not change the fact that the people who owned that yap, and they were incredibly wealthy because they owned that yap. And they could still transact on the basis of that yap. They would enter into agreements with people, right, you can have a claim on my yap, right, if I can take some stuff from you. Not a problem, right? How does that system operate? It's not something that we can necessarily conceptualize now because we use money. And the thing about money is, the money that we use today, the kind of money we use, is that it's very personal. In other words, when I give you money, right, there's nothing in that money that's related to me. It means nothing to you who I am once I give you money. Which is why stealing money is so important. If I steal money, it doesn't matter how I got that money. I can give it to anyone else. No one questions it. It's just money. Cool, we'll take it, right? But all money, if it's involved, if there's an implicit debt-credit relationship happening, right, there must be trust in the system, because that's how debt-credit relationships work, okay? So I have to trust that when I get my piece of paper, someone else will accept it in payment of a debt. And I will only accept money because I know I can use it to get goods somewhere else, right? Trust makes that whole system work. And in the society that used the yaps, no one really cared about the actual yap. What mattered was the trust. So a wealthy family was wealthy not because they had a huge yap, right? They were wealthy because they had land ownership or because they had access to productive means. So that when they entered into a debt situation, it was obvious they would repay it. There was no question of whether they would repay it. So you could have a huge yap and just transact against that yap. It meant nothing who owned the yap. What mattered was this was a trustworthy individual that would always pay back their debt. right? The modern monetary system doesn't work on that kind of level, except that we all trust that the rand will buy us stuff, and so we accept rands in payments. When that system collapses and trust in that system collapses, then people no longer accept those coins or notes. And that's the kind of situation that happens when you have an economy with hyperinflation. For whatever reason, the unit of account, the monetary medium, just no one cares. No one wants to use it because no one has any trust in the system anymore. That's what really collapses. So when you have like the collapse of the Zimbabwean dollar, what really happens there is the collapse of trust in the system, and no one uses it anymore. So then what is money? What is it as a thing? It doesn't really matter what the tangible thing is. What matters is what money does, how you use it. And what's important for money is that we use it as a medium of exchange, which means, as we've discussed, it's something that we give over to people in exchange for goods and services or labor. Yeah? Yeah. Yes. Is inflation good for borrowers or lenders? There is a discussion on that in the textbook. If you have inflation and you've lent someone money, when you get paid back, that money you're getting paid back is worth less. So when you lend and there's inflation, unexpected inflation, then it's bad for you as the lender. If you've borrowed, when you're repaying your money, you're repaying with something which is worth less than what it was when you borrowed it. So that's good for you. If there was unexpected inflation, you're not paying back something that's worth less. Excellent. So it's good for you if you are a borrower. And then vice versa for if inflation is lower than you expected, then if you borrow, that's bad for you. Right? Okay. Anyway, so medium of exchange. It's also a unit of account. What do we mean by unit of account? Again, what I described previously, when I go to the shop and I buy milk and it's denominated in rands. It's not denominated in units of labor. It's not denominated in units of bread. It's denominated in units of rand. That's a unit of account. In other words, it's the measure for stating the prices of something. And it's also a store of value. In other words, what I've described already, the fact that I can get paid money today and only use it to purchase goods and services 3 months down the line means that my money is storing value for me. I exchange my labor today for money, but I don't spend that money today. I have stored the value of my labor from today, and I can use it in 3 months' time, which is really one of the most devastating things about, say, unemployment. I have labor today, and if I don't use that labor today, I'm unable to store the value of that labor in anything. It just disappears. Unless I use that labor, it's gone. If I can use it today and get paid in money, I've now stored the value of that labor to any other period, right? Which is what savings are about. If I can't use my labor today, I cannot generate savings. And then not only am I wasting resources today, I'm also unable to insure myself essentially in the future against circumstances where I'm unable to use my labor. So, money, medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value. Those are your three primary functions. And when I say a unit of deferred payment, that's essentially saying that money has this intertemporal exchange feature, which underlies all three of these other features as well. What do we use? What do we consider to be money? In the South African economy, we have both currency and deposits. Currency is separate to deposits. In other words, currency are actually the notes and coins which circulate, in other words, which I have in my wallet or which you have in your piggy bank, wherever it is, right? That's actual currency. If it's in like a shop register, that's currency. That's different to a deposit. A deposit is the value, the nominal value of your bank, say, savings, if you have a savings account. In other words, you have some amount, some money amount in a bank deposit. Okay? that constitutes money. In other words, if we want to say what is money, let's say money equals M. M is equal to currency plus deposits. Okay? How do we actually measure money? We have three main measures of money, but there's also one underneath this called M naught. Okay, so M naught, let me just slot this in down here. M naught. M naught is just basically currency. Okay? Notes and coins. Actually, sorry, I've written their currency. It's technically not currency. The money base is actually the notes and coins at the Reserve Bank. So notes and coins in reserve. Let me just double check that, but I think that's right. So in other words, when you have notes and coins which circulate, that's currency. If there are notes and coins which are held by the banking system in something called reserve, in other words, they're not in circulation, then they form part of the money base. And I'm just double check that I'm correct on this, but I'm pretty sure that's the money base. Okay? M naught. In fact, I could be wrong. Let's not call that the money base, and let's not call it the notes and coins in reserve. Let's call it notes and coins for now. It might be currency. M naught might be currency, and then the money base is actually, money base is the notes and coins in reserve. And again, notes and coins in reserve are different to currency. So I'm going to just double check. I think M naught is currency. Then you get M1. M1 is currency plus check deposits. Basically means call deposits. What is a call deposit? A call deposit is any kind of deposit that if you go to the bank today, you put your what's that thing called? Your bank card, whatever, your deposit card. Is that called a deposit card? What is your bank card called? I don't know. Debit card, yeah. That's right, debit card. Cool. So you take your debit card, you put it in the bank, you withdraw money. Okay? That is a call deposit. Any kind of any money that you just go to the bank and you just take the money out without having to wait for it, that's a call deposit. Also called a check deposit. Okay? So M1 is any currency that you're holding plus the kind of deposit that you can just get access to without having to wait. Then you get M2, which is M1, in other words, currency plus call deposits plus other short and medium-term deposits. What is a short and a medium-term deposit? I'm not sure if any of you have something like a 30-day call account. Anyone got anything like that? Okay. In other words, you go to the bank, you can give them money and you say, right, if I want to take this money out, I will give you 30 days notice, and then you give me the money. And what the bank does is it gives you a higher interest rate. Okay? So in other words, if you have a call deposit, you have your savings account, the bank maybe gives you, I don't know, like 1.5% interest. Okay? If you have a 30-day call account, they give you like 3% interest. Right? If you have a 90-day account, they give you maybe 3.5% interest. Okay? So those are short and medium-term deposits. Okay? Like a money market fund. A money market fund, normally you require at least, I think it's like 7 days or something like that, right? Or, no, I think, well, it depends. Some money markets you can have like 1 day, some money markets are 7 days, but I think it's at least a day before you can get your cash. And then M3 is M2, in other words, currency, call deposits, short-term deposits, medium-term deposits, all of those, plus any longer time horizons. Okay? So like if you put your money into like a 12-month fixed deposit or something like that, you got to wait for a while before you get that cash. So the distinction, in other words, as you go from M1 down to M3, your savings, in other words, your assets, that's this financial asset, the liquidity of that financial asset decreases. In other words, as we go down, we get less and less liquid. Liquid means how quickly can we use it in a transaction to do something. Okay? So obviously if I've got cash in my hand, no stress, I just use it. It's 100% liquid, right? I don't have to wait. If I've got a 7-day call account, I have to wait for 7 days before I can use my money, right? That's less liquid. Now I'm waiting for 7 days. If I have 30 days to wait, even less liquid, okay? So liquid, how quickly can I use it in a transaction? Okay? We then make a distinction. If we're saying that cash and deposits are what we consider to be money, what about then, for example, a debit card or a credit card or a check? Are those not money, is the question. The argument is that a debit card itself is not money. What a debit card does is it transfers a deposit value, which is money, from one place to another place. That's what the debit card does. If you use your debit card, right, to pay for something in the shop, what that does is it transfers a debit balance from your account into a debit balance in someone else's account, right? The card itself is not the money. The card itself moves money around, right? If I have a debit card in my wallet, I go to the ATM, I withdraw money, my deposit value goes down, the cash in circulation value goes up. The debit card itself is not the money, it's a transfer of money from the bank into my hand, right? That's what I use the debit card for. Same thing with a credit card. What happens with a credit card? Credit card does the same process, except what it can do is it can increase the money supply, because what happens when you use a credit card is, let's say I use the credit card in a shop and I have no money in my bank account, so I use my credit card to pay for something. When I use my credit card, I essentially enter into a loan agreement with the bank, right? I now agree to pay the bank back in some future period, right? I say, please deduct money from my account which I don't have and transfer it to someone else. That's what a credit card does, right? When I say, right, deduct money which I do not have and transfer it to someone else, and the bank says no problem, right? What that does is it increases the value of deposits somewhere in the banking system. When the increase in deposits go up, money supply goes up. Why did the money supply go up? Because I entered into a debt agreement with the bank. I became a loan on the bank's balance sheets. I'm now an asset to the bank. I owe them money. Okay? And what we will see a little bit later on is whenever you increase loans, you increase money supply. When you increase loans through the banking system, you increase money supply. Okay? How? Because an increase in loans leads to an increase in deposits, and when we increase deposits, money supply goes up. Why? Because money supply, part of our money supply is deposits. And that is a great spot to leave it. We've defined what money is. We're then going to talk about the banking system from next week, Wednesday. So we'll start Wednesday, not with a question really, because I don't think we've done enough to give a question, but we'll talk about more of the stuff and then do a question at the end of Wednesday, and then anything that we need to finish off on Thursday we can do on Thursday as well. But otherwise, that's it for today. Any issues? You can come and chat to me now. Otherwise, I'll see you next week, Wednesday. We do have a lecture. Okay? Cool.